Hey everybody, Matt here. I'm going to read you one of the short stories out of my new collection, Horrors Untold Volume 2. The story I'm going to read to you today is entitled It Came from the Sea. I hope you enjoy it. The sun peeked over the horizon of a sloshing cobalt ocean. Its rays spanned far and wide, ushering in the start of another humid August day. Gulls cackled as they perched atop white weathered benches that lined the edges where a sprawling beach met with an equally impressive in length boardwalk. The lumber of the walk was grayed with age, which juxtaposed against the shimmering tan sand of the beach. Beyond churned the sea. Its sapphire waters sparkled like diamonds under the trail of a newly rising sun. I wish we had one more day here. I know, right? A whole week's vacation and only a few days without rain. Figures the last day would be the most gorgeous. James Kennedy and Cheryl Birkin were walking hand in hand along the coastline, mere inches from where the waves raptured the sand of the beach. The ground beneath their feet was chilled to the touch, which was a stark contrast to the thick and abusive humidity in the air. They both wore bathing suits, not only because they planned on swimming, but because it's what you do at the beach, Cheryl would say. Cheryl was looking out toward the ocean. Her navy blue eyes matched its waters. She always loved the beach. It felt like a second home to her. She came to this exact beach resort with her family when she was a child, and it called to her to return every year. James wasn't much for the scenery. He loved hiking and being away from masses of people. If he had his way, they'd be vacationing in the mountains, trekking along God knows how many miles of pine needle covered trails. But he gave in to Cheryl's wishes every vacation. Not because he wanted to avoid a fight, but because he knew she loved it so much here. "How long until we can come back?" Cheryl asked, her voice sounding low and gripe with sadness. Cheer up," James replied as he slapped Cheryl on her bare shoulder, forgetting about the painful sunburn she complained about the day prior. Her skin flashed white for a couple seconds before the crimson tone of scorched flesh came back over. "You look like a cooked lobster," he remembered remarking to Cheryl as she stripped down for bed last night. Her skin matched the red tone of her hair, so she looked like she was cooked from head to toe, and James couldn't help but joke about it. Except now he added injury to insult. James threw his hand over Cheryl's shoulder. The heat permeating from her skin was impressive. "Shit, I'm sorry, Cheryl recoiled, dropped down to the beach, and splashed some cold water on it. "Stop touching it, you dingus!" As she ducked down, James caught view of something far out in the ocean. He couldn't make out what it was at first, but the object was flopping about in the waves. He couldn't tell if it was something man-made or biological, but judging from its aquatic abilities, he reasoned to himself that it had to be some sort of creature. Despite his realization, James also noticed that he was unable to look away. He couldn't get himself to do anything but stand there and watch it. He couldn't take his eyes off of it. James wanted nothing more than to help Cheryl and to show her that what he was seeing, but he was physically unable to do so. He stared on, watching the anomaly churn and flop about in the violent ocean. "Hey, I called you dingus. You gonna fire back or what?" Cheryl looked up at James. He was standing oddly, like he was in suspended animation. His face was pointing out toward the ocean. She didn't look to see what he was staring at. Instead, Cheryl got to her feet and lightly shook James to try and break him from his trance. James noticed Cheryl talking to him. He could see her standing right before him and felt her bony fingers with their equally long fake fingernails slightly digging into his shoulder. But he didn't reply to her. He couldn't make a sound or an inkling of a gesture to let her know he was still aware of her. But something was holding him back from doing so. Something was holding him back from doing anything else but stare outward toward the mysterious creature. "Stop staring at me like that. Look, I'm sorry," I yelled. "If this is another one of your stupid jokes, I swear I'll..." In that short moment, James stepped toward Cheryl, breaking her hold on his shoulders, and swiftly grasped onto her left wrist. Cheryl bent over in pain from the strength of his grasp, all the while clawing at him with her free hand. "Stop it, you're hurting me!" Cheryl was freaked out, but she knew James to be a trickster, so she was waiting for the "I gotcha" moment. She often wondered why she put up with his antics, but whenever she'd look at his sturdy body and devilishly handsome looks, she would swoon and forget about the childish games. Not to mention, he also would more often than not show how much he cared than joke. "Come on, stop messing around," Cheryl demanded with a slight smirk on her face, hoping that would end the charade. She tugged hard, desperately trying to free her hand. It did nothing. Now she was beginning to panic. "James, let go. If you're fucking around, you better knock it off before I scream." It was an early morning on the beach, and for the first time, they were the only ones walking on the sands. But in the distance, Cheryl could see a shop owner on the boardwalk unlocking the front gate to his store. James's grip grew tighter, and she could feel the joints and bones of her wrist compressing under the pressure. Her sunburn wasn't making things any better either, as it added to a burning sensation. She looked up at James, hoping to look into his beautiful emerald eyes and beg him to stop. But those eyes weren't there. They were washed over by an inky black venom that stirred about. His mouth hung agape and produced sounds of labored breathing, like that of an asthma attack. "Scream, damn it." Cheryl took in a breath and tilted to the side of James to get a clear yell out to the shop owner. Before she managed to get a squeak out, James' hand flung up and grasped onto a chunk of her hair. He pulled on it, ripping a few strands free before Cheryl succumbed to the pain. Her knees flopped into the wet, condensed sand. She tried to scream again, but was stopped short yet again as James forced her face into the sand beneath her. Her nose met first, holding form for a split second before giving way and cracking to the left. The rest of her face followed after, violently thudding into the earth. Cheryl then heard the sound of a wave break, and sure enough, the chilled, salty foam came rushing over her, filling into the small indents in the sand beneath her cheeks and bloodied nostrils. Thankfully, the water receded quickly and soaked into the beach as fast as it came. James lifted her head up and turned it to look at the ocean. Cheryl, meanwhile, had her eyes shut tight due to the sand that got into them and the sting from her broken nose. "Fucking scream, you idiot!" She spat out a glob of thick spit that mixed from the gushing blood of her nose before she took in a deep breath. This time, she managed to scream. "Somebody help me!" She listened, hoping for the man on the boardwalk. Nothing. Again, James slammed her face into the sand. Cheryl managed to tilt her head to the side this time, saving her nose from another assault. Her cheek hit with a wet smack before her temple slapped into the beach. The impact was jarring, making the washing wave split into two and swirl around as before it pulled back into the ocean. The call of another wave echoed before her, followed shortly by the rush of more frigid froth. She took note that this wave was stronger and carried more water than foam, telling her that the tide was coming in. Yet again, another wave crashed. She screamed before the water hit her, but it fell mute within the flurry of a crashing wave. Her head was submerged in the swirling salty brine, disorienting her. She flashed back to the beginning of their vacation. Romantic dinners, swimming, boating, shopping, and to top it all off, James proposed to her at sunset on the top of the Ferris wheel overlooking the boardwalk. There, above the entirety of her favorite place in the whole world, he asked her to marry him. Another wave crashed, bringing her reeling thoughts back to the current predicament. She had said yes, so why is this happening? The wave then retreated back, and James lifted her head once again, angling her to finally lay eyes upon the abomination in the waves. Cheryl took in a deep breath. Instead of holding it in her lungs, she chose to try screaming again. "Help! Please!" This time, she opened her eyes. But it did no good. Before she had a moment to take in what was beyond the coastline, an impressive wave built up before the two of them. Cheryl reached her left hand up toward James, managing to grasp onto his elbow before it fell down to his hand. She gently held his clenched fist that wrenched her hair. It was a soft embrace in the hopes of appealing to the love she knew he had for her. There was a brief moment of hope as she felt his grip loosen. The massive wave hit a few feet before them, and as the raging maelstrom of water came barreling toward them, James's grip clamped even tighter as he forced her face once again down into the beach. "Please don't do this." As the wave hit, it knocked out the minuscule breath Cheryl had left in her lungs. The last thing she would feel was the frosty rush of the battering wave. The water breached itself far longer than the previous waves had. With no breath left in her lungs, Cheryl instinctively inhaled, allowing the salty waters to fill her. The very waters she loved were the very thing that had choked. The very waters she loved were the very thing that choked the life from her. Cheryl's hand that held onto James's fist fell lifelessly into the brine. The engagement ring that James had given her, that sat far too loose, since she had no idea what her ring size was, and had gotten her whatever he could get, slid off and sucked away into the ocean, doomed to be lost as it mixed with the shimmering waters. James dropped to one knee and scooped Cheryl up in his arms before slowly walking off into the oncoming waves. "Hey! You kids! All right out there?" A male voice called from the boardwalk. It was the shop owner. James paid him no attention as he continued his trek out into the increasingly brutal tide, Cheryl dangling over his threshold. His dark eyes never broke their fixation as he continued on, the water now lapping onto his midsection. "It is done," James said aloud in an uncharacteristically dark tone, watching the strange shape glide effortlessly through the rising waves. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" the shopkeeper called out. For the first time since spotting it, James broke his gaze of the entity. He turned his head, looking back toward the store owner with his dark-colored eyes. On the edge of the boardwalk, a middle-aged man was waving him down. The man wore a pair of bright orange trunks and a vanilla Hawaiian t-shirt patterned with hibiscus flowers. A set of binoculars dangled from his neck, the strap disappearing behind his thick graying beard. James had momentarily regained the ability to look back, but was unable to call out to the shopkeep. As he tried to do so, a scorching sensation flushed over his head, and the calling of the odd beast's influence took him once more. The man watched as James turned back to the sea and walked dead on toward a gigantic oncoming wave. He witnessed in horror as the wave split open and engulfed the couple as if it was consuming them. Without thinking, the man snatched up his binoculars and began scanning the ocean for their bodies. This wasn't the first time he had seen people on vacation get taken out, normally by riptides, but he made it a habit to carrying binoculars to help locate endangered swimmers. He stopped. He noticed something odd, something massive and unlike anything he had ever seen before, nor could he ever possibly describe. He felt compelled to come closer. There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you like this, there are plenty more stories in Horrors Untold Volume 2. You can grab this on Amazon, and I also have signed copies that I'm selling right now currently. So if you want one of those, you can hit me up on Twitter, Matt_Wildison at Twitter. So thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you later.